We have two passages of scripture this morning from the New Testament. First from Luke chapter 12. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And from 1 John chapter 4. So we have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love. And those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because he first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and hate a brother or sister are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandments we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. The word of the Lord.
Perfect love casts out fear. What feelings come to you as you listen to these words from the writer of 1 John? Perfect love casts out fear. Does it bring immediate peace and comfort? Or perhaps, like me, a bit of uneasiness? Perfect anything brings a little uneasiness to me. It may seem strange, but as a minister and a woman often challenged by my fears for the future of my family, church, country, even the earth itself, the words perfect love casts out fear invoke a lot of things, one of which is a little shame. I wonder if my frequent fear might suggest my weak faith or my inadequate love. The forces that confront us in the chaos of our modern world have created an atmosphere of growing and pervasive distrust. These forces are large and confusing and often malevolent, and we feel vulnerable in the face of them and powerless to confront them. The violence against innocent people in the streets and schools and theaters and churches, the complexity of technology and its profoundly confusing impact on human life, the vitriolic public rhetoric that has become largely acceptable in racial slurs, insulting remarks about women, lack of concern, even disdain for the impoverished, lack of trust in our fellow men and women, pandemic threats that seem unending. We having a good time yet? We respond to our fear by becoming glued to the coverage of stories, some of us, becoming glued to the stories that provoke it. We watch devastating natural disasters, hurricanes and floods and droughts and fires, made more lethal and destructive by global warming. We endure month after month of lies and intensely mean-spirited political campaigning. We witness the growing enmity between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they serve, and the fierce anger and rage of crowds who feel that they have too little control over their lives. We see refugees streaming helplessly out of war-torn countries. In our fear, we can become obsessed with our personal security and seek to bolster it despite what this might mean to our suffering neighbor. After a particularly scary or disturbing news story, we might find ourselves living with a sort of smoldering dread that puts a dark cloud over the experiences of the day. Soon, either consciously or unconsciously, and bit by bit, fear can begin its characteristic activity, shutting us down. Okay, it's been this long before I've asked you to participate in my sermon. You ever have that feeling that you just want to shut it all down? If we aren't to slip into painful anxiety, numbness sometimes becomes our defense. Traumatized by fearful fantasies beyond our capacity to cope and desperate to pretend that we are okay and not touched by the fear around us, we may have a sudden impulse to check out, to hole up, to binge watch TV or play video games or go shopping, although many of us do that online now. Life is changing so quickly, and we don't always understand what it's all about. We quit listening and just take care of number one. Collectively, we put guards in airports and at schools. We buoy up our police and health departments. We install more video cameras. We build walls. We develop a paranoia about the hidden villains who live among us. When fear takes over our life, it begins to steal our soul from our body. When fear enters the body, it constricts the spirit and over time destroys the human capacity for thoughtful, creative, heartfelt, and compassionate engagement with the world. I want to say that we did a funeral Friday at 4:00. The room was full of people honoring this man, Jim Johnston. He was our longtime treasurer, a longtime supporter of the church. He and I were on opposite ends of the political spectrum, probably. We came from a time where you were all decent people. You had different perspectives on things, different emphasis, maybe different ideas of solutions, but there was an integrity and a decency. And it was so lovely to be in that room with all those people who felt that, and the children of Jim who communicated that to everyone, what it was like to have your dad be the Boy Scout leader, and on and on and on. Fear causes us to develop armor and to lose contact with our inner selves, our connections with others, and our connections with our God. We close down, we shut up, we hide. In my study of history, as a young girl even, I've always been baffled by and appalled at how the civilized and basically good people of different countries, and the one we were told a lot about in those days was Germany, once brought a monster like Hitler to power and allowed him to control the lives and deaths of so many. How did that happen? Germany was the home of the most wonderful composers and philosophers and educated people, and somehow that evolved into their world. And I thought, well, that'll never happen again. I grew up with this as an example of people so traumatized by fear that they began lying to themselves and believing their own lies in order to cope. They became false selves. In Hitler's Germany, even the church was full of traumatized souls who did too little too late to stop the contagiousness of the evil. Fear, it seems, can be an alien presence. It isn't only my fear alone. You and I didn't create it out of thin air. You're just not a nervous, anxious person. Some of us might have more anxiety than others, but it doesn't just come from you. It doesn't belong just to you or to me, although our reactions might make it seem like it. It has a force of its own. Here on our soil, we permitted the horror of slavery, the genocide of Native Americans, and some of you historians out there and know so many more stories of smaller people. I give the obvious ones. Robert Sardello, in his book, Freeing the Soul from Fear, refers to fear as a shapeshifter. Stay with that image for a little bit. Often when we think we have freed ourselves from fear, it shows up in the very approaches we are using to control it. The nuclear weapons produced to make the world safe for democracy have, in their unimaginable power, themselves become a tremendous source of modern fear. The weapons we manufacture and sell around the world are used to perpetuate the violence among other nations and peoples. So what is the antidote to this spread of fear that isolates and separates us from each other. At the risk of sounding sentimental or simplistic, I'll start with an answer which I may add, I believe I have on good authority. Perfect love casts out fear. Love is the only healer. And you got to break that down and use that in creative ways, but love is its origin. God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Okay, so finally, some respite. We can close our eyes and rest in these comforting words. All we have to do is get closer to God. But here's the truth. Love doesn't allow us to run away from the problems of this world, but rather plunges us deeply into its pathetic, suffering heart. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus' great love did not protect him from suffering deeply. It led him right down to Golgotha. In his book, Writing in the Sand, Thomas More writes this line: Jesus goes as deep into his suffering as he reaches high into his spirituality. The depth of his emotion gives human grounding to his God-like vision. The fact that one of the most powerful phrases in the Bible is also the shortest. Can anybody say it? You will when I say it. Jesus wept. Yep, Jesus wept. Both together make him a model of compassion and responsiveness. Love won't protect any of us from suffering or keep us safe and alive. We cannot run away from our fear, not even to God. It is this final realization of the inescapability of our fear that is the beginning of healing. Fear cannot be outrun, or it will ultimately catch up to us. Did you ever notice in a dream or something when you start running away from the horror? It's almost like it brings it toward you, the running away from. When we realize this and face it, our confidence in our own humanity increases, and our confidence in our fellow human beings increases, and our capacity to love others grows. The Episcopal priest and author Matthew Fox once told a story about a school board in New Hampshire. I've told this story before, but I think it's worth telling again, which had been taken over by Christian fundamentalists. He related how their decree, henceforth in the school system, no public school teacher is allowed to use the word imagination. In the classroom, Satan is found in the imagination. And far be it from you to put on costumes at Halloween or something like that, right? Fox reasoned, well, of course Satan is there in the imagination, but God is there too. Everything is in the imagination. That's what makes it so wonderful. You have to choose. It comes from inside. Here's a clear example of fear as a shapeshifter. Though we have some sympathy with the fear that Christianity is losing ground and as an influence in our society, we all grieve that, or many of us do. And in the lives of children, a desperate attempt to control behavior, to shut people up, is simply more fear shape-shifted into a different form. Fear is a force of division, separating us from others and ourselves. Love is a force of connection, giving us the motivation to begin the lifelong challenge of wrestling with our fear. It's an individual challenge, but its healing power is guided by love's larger force, and it can have an effect on a whole society. If we don't take a step back and look at our fear, we run the risk of identifying with our fear. Now that's the key. You can allow yourself to have fear, but don't become that fear. Let's say that again. If we don't take a step back and look at our fears, we run the risk of identifying with them, and we live them out unconsciously in our day-to-day lives. Our fears become us. We are justified by them. We develop a false self that invisibly controls us. Fear destroys our human capacity for imaginative engagement with the world. Oh, we have read so much beautiful poetry this year, haven't we? We've turned to poetry. I used to include a poem every once in a while, but this year we did a whole series with poetry as the center. It's looking for beauty, looking for truth within the world that we live in. We express loving sentiments in church on Sunday, but somehow they seem to fade when we try to take them into the challenges of the weekday world. We must bring that prayerful presence of the imagination into our lives to seek the depth of our love. What in the world does that mean? Let's do it one more time. We must bring the prayerful patience of the imagination into our lives to seek the depth of our soul. I wish one of you guys would tell me what I meant. I can't make an example for everything I say. Anybody got a thought that comes to your mind?
Looking back at yourself.
Looking back at yourself. Right now I'm thinking, wow, Karin, you are really claiming to know and speak about the true nature of love, because I'm going to give you a list of what is love. A task that has challenged the greatest theologians, philosophers, poets, and artists throughout time. I hope I just am humbly offering some thoughts, just brief thoughts on love. Love doesn't belong to you or me. It flows from a sacred source into the world. That's why I think it's wonderful how young people marry each other and they have their best friend do it. Good, I'm all about that. But somewhere in there has to be a recognition that love comes from a sacred source. It isn't just between two people. It flows into two people. And then there's a lot of other things going on too. Our work is simply to become a vessel through which love can flow. Love opens us to the mystery of another. This makes stereotyping, racism, and bigotry really impossible if you do this. 3, when love touches us, our whole presence changes. It becomes a creative force through which we imagine new ways of thinking and working and relating to each other. We need some new things going on, some new solution to the world's old problems. Love carries with it its own difficulties. It hurts, it confuses, it keeps us awake at night. I have my 2 twin grandsons, they're 20-something months old. They both have, do I have the title right? Hand, foot, and mouth disease.
Yeah.
And I am a wreck. I'm thinking, why do we love people? It's too much trouble to watch them suffer and to stay up at night worrying about people you love. That's the way it is. Love will not let go. So if what you're experiencing is too easy, well, it's probably not love. Love insists that even in our surrender to it, we not lose ourselves. Even as vessels for love, we continue to be and value our individual selves. So you don't just ram into the whole, we're not just congregation with one idea or one thought. We are very different individual people who see and live love in different ways. And we have to be at work in our own individual interior lives to know what that means. And somebody else can't really tell you, even though I'm trying to today. When we love another, not out of our own need, but really seeing and valuing them, we release love into the world around us. When you give love, you really have released it into the world, even though it may seem it's just to your grandson or your granddaughter or your husband or wife or mother or father, but you're making love happen. Well, I hope that you might speak or write down your own beliefs about love. Focus on it a little bit, the kind that we are promised casts out fear. The simple pondering of love is itself a loving act. Thinking about love is a loving act. When we begin to imagine this quality of love in the world, we experience the world as a sacred place. In this unfair, scary, angry, disappointing place, we begin to see the invisible behind the visible. The spiritual term for this is intent. We have intent. It means that something held in thought has become so real as to be literally present. So we Christians, I swear, how many years are we going to sing those hymns about the kingdom coming? But it's our intent. It's our intent that exists in the world and becomes almost a literal reality. Don't mistake, this is not the same thing as refusing to see what is really there, a world in serious trouble. It's rather being truly able, through the power of our love, to imagine it to be different. And through our imagining, the world has already begun to change, just in the doing. And so have we. Amen.